Well, I don't know why I'm being maligned as a person who goes on and on and on, and I've made a real effort to keep this relatively short so that, because I know you came to see the movie, right?
Sorry, I couldn't.
So a brief introduction. Saul Leiter, as many of you know, died last November at the age of 89. And that's the Leiter that you'll see in the film a little bit later, the avuncular, witty, good-humored, and humorous son of the rabbi. It's in his later years that Leiter and the unique beauty coming from out of his sensibility has come to be appreciated. And focus has fallen on his color work, his personal work that he did all along at the same time he was doing his black and white work in the 50s and 60s. It's Leiter's modesty that you will hear about, always hears about. You'll see it in the film. He was somewhat amazed and indeed surprised by the upsurge of interest in him in the number of books and so forth that have come on in the last couple of decades. The film is very strong as a portrait of his rather engaging personality. I think you'll come to love Leiter. I mean, he's the kind of guy that you'd like to hang out with, and, just because he's that kind of personality that gives you the feeling that there's a friendly harmony in life that indeed can be found and enjoyed if we only have the patience to find it. The film is, in my view, perhaps a little less strong in drawing what I think are the inescapable connections between this personality and the work that he created. And perhaps that's my role here this evening, to offer some small hypotheses, some modest critical perspective to put in the back pocket as a kind of thinking tools. If they lie easily in your mental hand, I invite you to make use of them, and if they don't, enjoy the work as you see fit. Most of us, I think, come to a new photographer, a photographer we don't know much about, through the brief biographical sketch, an encyclopedia entry about their life and career. And these are good and inevitable places to begin, but probably not good places to stop. I'll come back to that idea in a moment, but let's start with the sketch. Leiter was born in 1923 in Pittsburgh, and his father was an Orthodox rabbi and Talmudic scholar of some repute. His mother was the parent, especially attuned to Saul's interests, and when he showed interest in photography, she bought him his first camera, a Detrola. I have a particular fondness for the Detrola because I believe it's with the borrowed Detrola that my father made the only pictures of me and my sister that he actually made, aside from pictures he made during World War II out the window of a bomber of which he was the crew chief. Other pictures were made, but it was my mother who was the photo historian in our family. At any rate, Leiter's early education was at a Talmudic academy in New York, and in the 1940s, trying to please his father and fulfill the family tradition of devotion to knowledge, he went off to Cleveland to study at a rabbinical college there. The path of scholarship didn't take for Leiter. His interests were artistic, and he wanted to be a painter, and indeed he exhibited paintings there in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh, and even at Gump's department store in San Francisco. Have you been to Gump's? It's amazing. It's sort of like the gift shop in modern museums on steroids. Amazing, amazing place. So it's not surprising that we exhibit paintings there. At any rate, he left rabbinical studies in 1946 and moved to New York with the idea of being a painter. This is the young Leiter. When he got to New York, he met and became friends with Richard Poussaint Dart. Now, today, Poussaint Dart's name, unless you are a specialist took a degree in art history, is less well known than de Kooning, Rothko, Pollock. But these were all contemporaries, and he was quite well known at the time. Had impressive exhibitions and commissions. This is one of his paintings. Poussaint Dart also worked with photography. This is a self-portrait of his. And perhaps you can begin to see some influence or similarity with kinds of images that Leiter has now become famous for making. In addition to being friends with Gustave Dart, Leiter was coming into contact with not only his photography, he met Gene Smith and became friends with Gene Smith. Oh, this, I wanted to show you. This is a picture by Gustave Dart of Mark Rothko. So you see again, I'm sure you're familiar. Rothko's paintings don't shimmer like this, but as I'm sure most of you know. But I couldn't resist showing a Rothko painting next to a Leiter image. There's a similar vocabulary that develops in periods of time, but it's used to articulate different understandings, different meanings. Interestingly, in the film, you'll find that Leiter talks about this image here on the right. He's joking, saying that it should be accompanying his obituary, because I think the title he's given it is "Shot Through Boards," and so forth. Interestingly enough, we'll see toward the end of these few remarks images that, in fact, were associated with his obituary, and they don't include this one. Anyway, he became friends with Gene Smith, and Gene Smith gave him a copy of Alexei Brodovich's book Ballet, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a very famous expressionistic use of photography. So he was aware of artistic possibilities of photography even at the time that he was going on painting. These are some of his paintings. Again, they're not animated paintings as far as I know. And I won't testify that this is the correct color palette either. But a sample. Through the early time, he was making black and white images like these. You'll see they have, I think, or they express the kind of whimsy and humor that you'll see expressed in the film as he talks. He certainly was not unknown. Life magazine did this photo spread, which has become known as The Wedding as Funeral. They published him several times in 1951. He was walking along and felt sure that this was a funeral, since the people gathered outside the church looking so intently, and it turned out that it was a wedding. A few more examples of his street work. He had shows at this time. He was included in MoMA's show called Always the Young Strangers, and he had some of his work exhibited in Tokyo in this time. But since '48, he had also been making images in color right along. And in the late 50s, he in fact gave a slide talk about his color work, and some of it was exhibited in a gallery. Steichen wanted to include Leiter in the famous Family of Man show, but Leiter, again, showing that famous modesty, felt that he was not good enough and declined the invitation. But I suppose Steichen persisted, because in 1957, a few years later, he included 20 of Leiter's images in a show called Experimental Photography in Color at the MoMA. Leiter, during this time, about 1957, he began to make fashion work. And as you'll hear him talk about how he found nothing wrong with making a living. He found it quite respectable. The covers may have looked like this, but the inside pictures often look like this. So he was able often to marry a commercial assignment with his particular personal aesthetic, as you can see here. Things veiled, seen through veils of reflection or obstruction, occluded and revealed in different kinds of ways. Actually, it seems to me that if we survey his career, it's thanks to the wonderful pioneering book by the curator Jane Livingston, seen here on the left, that Leiter became thought of as part of the New York School. And she may have coined that phrase, I'm not certain, but you may remember Livingston as the curator of photography at the Corcoran, who resigned when, under pressure from the benighted Solons of our U.S. Congress, the Mapplethorpe show that she had curated was canceled. What chiefly defines the New York School, as I see it, is that their work is centered on the street and life as seen through the street in New York. And while Leiter fit in this way, in style and sensibility, he was rather different. Livingston wrote of him, "Leiter is a rare artist, one whose vision is so encompassing, so refined, so in touch with a certain lyrical undertone, that his best photographs occasionally seem literally to transcend the medium." This was in 1992. Again, if any of you can facilitate an introduction between me and Jane Livingston, I would love to meet this very interesting, dynamic woman and thinker and curator. This is more typical of Leiter in black and white, which I think you can see is very much in keeping with what we'll see, or what you may already have seen of Leiter in color. Really, it seems to me that being included in that 1992 book awakened a different level of interest in Leiter and his work. A rich relationship with the Howard Greenberg Gallery in New York takes off then, and shows of his black and white work began then, and after Leiter brought in a bag of his color slides and showed Howard, the explosion of interest in his color work begins. I have to show these because they seem to me to reflect the whimsy that's so typical in Leiter. Interestingly, the first solo show of Leiter's work was at the Milwaukee Art Museum in 2006. That's not surprising, I suppose, since Lisa Hofstadter was the curator there and she used to work at the Howard Greenberg Gallery, but I think we can take certain pride in that, and we had the first show here in Wisconsin. You'll see umbrellas all through Saul Leiter's work, and I suppose if I were writing a dissertation, I could talk about the umbrella in Leiter's work and what it might represent, what it might mean. In art history, some of you probably know there's a concept called discordia concourse, which means the concord of otherwise discordant things brought together by the artist. And in New York, of course, the predominant geometry is right angles or oblique angles. So there's a kind of discordia concourse in focusing on the circular amongst the geometric. As we see here in the early black and white work, the same sort of expression of formal whimsy going on. So this is the sketch that we will all encounter when we come to learn about Saul Leiter. I'd like to try to go beyond the sketch, if I might, for a moment. I said earlier that a sketch was a good place to start, but a bad place to stop. The application of an artist's work asks, or rather I should say, the appreciation of an artist's work asks more of us. But in fact, it seems to me that biography offers us more means for increasing that appreciation than we usually take from it. If I've made any sort of contribution to photocriticism over the years, I think it's been in studying the text of the artist's life and pondering its connection to the sensibility we see expressed in their art. Rich works, and Leiter's photographs certainly are rich works, reward an extra beat of contemplation. We may be struck by the form, the geometry, the color, the tone, the mood, the atmosphere, but in almost every case, when we are struck in this way by a sense that there's something pleasing and important there on some level, I think we also have the sense that there may be more there to be apprehended, appreciated, enjoyed, if we'll only take the time to apply a broader range of perception and inquiry. In the film, you will see Leiter in his apartment, a space filled up with time. He's surrounded by the images and objects of a lifetime, his paintings, his prints, his cameras, his mementos, the comfortable chair, perhaps an Amish chair from the look of it. And in a way, it might be said that we see him in the middle of a self-portrait by Saul Leiter. His presence, speaking from the center of this apartment, resembles on a metaphorical level, at least, one of his photographs. By that I mean we have layer upon layer of time, of history, of attitude and activity, and thus layer upon layer of emotion and understanding, of questions and efforts and provisional understanding giving way to new understanding, as new layers are added to the aggregate that makes up the present whole. When we view the color work for which he is now so justly admired, I suggest we see something very similar. I know it's often usual in photography criticism to talk mainly about the form and to stop there, but I feel compelled to explore what I call the aboutness of the photograph, not just what it is of, nominally, but what it means or might mean. So when I ponder these images, I ask myself, what do these barriers to seeing, so often included in the images, mean? What do these veils of rain-soaked glass or layers of multiple reflection mean? What might they mean? Are they barriers, to seeing, or are they part of what I'm supposed to see? Well, obviously they are that, so what does that mean? Or, again, what might it mean? What does all this simultaneous seeing mean? What thoughts and dispositions, what insights is it offering me? As I involved myself in pondering all this, I began to think back over Leiter's life, wondering what the text of it, the biography of it, might offer. And this image came to me. This is an image of a page from a rabbinic Bible, the thing Leiter's father spent his life studying, in which Leiter studied seriously for a lot of his youth. Indeed, you'll hear him say he had the talent for it, but turned away from it. This is an image of a page from the Talmud, and you can see they have something in common. Both offer simultaneous presentations of different perspectives, constructed, formed at different times, but brought together here to be unpacked, studied, explored. Time is both vertical and horizontal. The moments of the past have been stacked up in the moment of the present. And when I look at Leiter's images, I see something similar. You'll hear him say, talking in the film, about how for the Leiter family, knowledge was all important and that kindness was optional. A moment ago, you heard me seem to disparage form in looking at photographs, but there's a lot to be learned from form, and all of it isn't about geometric cleverness and invention. What I see in Leiter's images is a marriage. This I should explain. I should have gotten ahead of myself here. The central here is the earliest commentary, and it's followed by later commentators, so the stacking of perspectives, as I was talking about. What I see in Leiter's images is a marriage of kindness, resolve, peaceful and curious acceptance of the many layers of experience. The now contains a past, just as we believe and hope it holds a future of greater understanding and enjoyment. These things that seem to block us from seeing what we think we want to see are part of how we see and what we see or don't see. The gossamer veils of past fantasies, fulfilled or unfulfilled, affect what and how we see the present. All of what we bring to the present moments is present in the present moment. It's there in that aggregation that we find our peace and wisdom, if we find it at all. And I think we can only hope that we come to learn to see as lovingly and joyfully as saw Leiter. Enjoy the film.